I'm Declan Meade, and I'm the founding editor and publisher of Stinging Fly magazine and editor with Stinging Fly Press. And it's great to be back in Cork for the Short Story Festival. I've been coming here for many years. So part of the reason for this event is that somehow or other the Stinging Fly has managed to keep going for 20 years. And we hit that milestone earlier this year. So March 1998 would have been our very first issue. And that issue was kind of A4 stapled, 24 pages, I think, with we scrounged together money by selling a few ads, and we put out a call for submissions. At that time I was writing stories myself, trying to write stories myself really, and meeting lots of people who were also writing and who were frustrated at the lack of a place to send their work. And it just so happened that at that particular time there were very few magazines on the go, and kind of in my youthful ignorance, which I've tried to hold on to as much as possible, I just didn't know the history of Irish literary magazines. But of course there is a rich tradition there that we were just kind of tapping into, myself and my co-founding editor, Aoife Kavanagh. We just decided we'd set up the magazine, put out a call for submissions, see what happened, and that it wasn't a great life plan or anything, but it turned out to be what I've been doing for the last 20 years. And the formula has remained very much the same, just putting out calls for submissions, welcoming submissions from as wide a pool of people as possible, reading those submissions and taking what the editors believe to be the best work and giving it a platform. And that's what we try to do, continue to try to do. So the magazine has grown quite substantially in that time, just in terms of the physical heft of it, but the spirit of the magazine remains the same in terms of providing opportunities for new writers to come along, get their work read by semi-serious people, and to try and get the work out there into the world. So it's been a blessing, really, to do this and to still be involved in the magazine and the press. So this year we decided to mark the occasion of the 20 years by publishing this anthology of stories. So Short Stories really has, like the festival we're at today, has been the focus for us in terms of where we felt I suppose it was my interest, but I also felt that it was the form was neglected in terms of publishing, more mainstream publishing. So it was important to keep the form alive by offering a place where short stories could get published, and that has also informed the setting up of the press, which I did in 2005, and publishing collections, mostly debut collections of short stories, because again, that's a very hard thing for the writer starting out to get a collection of stories published. So that's also become part of the mission. But the magazine remains kind of the cornerstone of what we do, and we're very lucky at the moment to have Sally Rooney editing the magazine with us. She started up earlier this year, and hopefully we can hold on to her for as long as possible, even though she's become something an international publishing sensation in the meantime. So today we're going to have three readings by three of the, I guess putting this together was, it's like a double-baked souffle, if you like. I asked the editor and writer Sarah Gilmartin to come and help me make the selection for what would be our tentative best of, looking back over the 20 years and trying to include as many of the stories as possible. And we got to include, I'm happy to say, 40 of the stories from the magazine, and bring them all together in this book. So we kind of constantly added to the page count so that we could get more and more of them in, but it had to stop somewhere. But 40 stories from the first 20 years seemed like a good place to stop, which we did. So the three writers that we have today are Denton, Danielle McLaughlin, and Eimear Ryan, and that's the order in which they appear in the book. And just to be all cork about it, we're going to reverse the order. And so I'm going to invite Eimear Ryan up to read first. I'll just read you Eimear's bio. And I know this, but I'm going to have to read it. Eimear Ryan, his writing has also appeared in winter papers, Granta, Gorse, the Dublin Review, Town and Country, the anthology published by Faber and Faber, and The Long Gaze Back, the anthology published by New Ireland. She is co-editor of the relatively new, but on the scene a few years now, Banshee, which has an event here tomorrow at 2:30, back in this room. But yeah, so let's hear it for Eimear Ryan, who's going to read possibly her full story, which was published first in issue 14, volume 2, which I think was in 2009. So, but we have it here. Eimear.
Thanks, Declan. Hi everyone, thanks for coming out today. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to be reading alongside Danielle and Danny. As Declan said, this story was first published in 2009, and it was actually the second ever story I ever had accepted for publication. And when Declan got in touch to ask if it could be included in the anthology, I was delighted, of course, but I was also a little bit apprehensive because it had been so long since I'd actually read the story. But when I went back to it, I kind of realised that it was a very important story to me as a young writer. This was probably the first story I ever wrote, where I wrote about personal experiences, where I wrote about characters similar to myself, where I wrote about young women in general. And I think before the story, I kind of worried that those things weren't serious enough, weren't literary enough, or wouldn't be of interest to a kind of a general reading public. So this story gave me a lot of confidence as a young writer, so thanks, Declan. Body clock. Sometimes I'm shaken by the intense feelings you can have for a stranger. The sudden rush of affection for a kid in a supermarket hiding from his parents, or for an old man in a coffee shop blessing himself after finishing a muffin. Sometimes it's a pointless rage towards the teenage girls on the bus with the mocking laughs, or the guy who asks you for a light when you're sitting outside a cafe having lunch with your friends. Yes, you'll light his fag, and he'll lean in and cup your hand so it's weirdly intimate, but all you want to say is, call yourself a smoker? By the next day you've forgotten these people, but for a few moments they overwhelm you, short the circuit boards of your brain. Right now, I'm on the train going from Logan Airport to the Back Bay. I'm in the standing space, trying to shrink, make my suitcase look smaller than it is. Passengers trying to get past keep stumbling over me. I wait for the sighs of impatience, the muted glares, but the people here don't go in for that much. If I was anyone else on this train, I would hate me. I'm sitting on the broad back of my suitcase in Copley Square. If I tilt my head back as far as it will go, I can just about see the top of the John Hancock Tower, looking like a beaker filled with lagoon water. It's autumn, hot, and I wait, feeling my skin heat up and harden, watching teenagers ollie past no skateboarding signs. I'm waiting for Orla, who is 17 years older than me, 4 inches shorter, and 30 pounds lighter. She offered to meet me at the airport, but I like Boston. I want to experience some of it alone. I see Orla when she's about 50 yards away. We experience that awkwardness where you sight someone from a distance and have to maintain the enthusiasm until they're close to you. When is the right time to wave, to call out? 20 yards? 10? Hey Jules, she yells from 15 yards. She always knows the right time. She's wearing all black on a scorcher of a day. Her smile would be a beautiful one if not for the stains. It's the smile I'll probably have in 20 years. I have a sudden wish to have Orla around me all the time, just for that smile. It's the one thing that could wean me off smoking. We cross the square to a cafe where Orla knows the owner quite well. Sure enough, we get a complimentary bottle of wine. She looks across the table at me, sizing me up. To avoid the eye contact, I check the bottle's label, 06 Rioja. It means nothing to me, but Orla seems put out by the wine's vintage and origin. She fusses and apologises and pours large glasses, adding, "I've got better stuff at home." I'm buoyed by her slight discomfiture and don't bother to tell her that my rough palate makes no distinction between €7 swill from Spar and a swanky restaurant's house wine. I should point out that I'm not a bad person. I want her to come away from this visit believing that we bonded. I just hope it doesn't take too much out of me. After we order, Orla claps her hands and sighs in a way that is meant to evoke deep satisfaction. So, I replied dutifully. How is Niall? Good form, you know Dad like. Yes, irrepressible. She rolls her eyes, trying to disguise it by leaning forward to sip her wine. And who was that charming friend of yours at your 18th? Dermot. Yeah, can't wait to get back to college. We're going to be living together again this year. She stops sipping. Ooh, are you sleeping together? Oh God, no. Why ever not? He's cute. And you, honey, you've got that certain appeal. It isn't like that. Like what? This is gorgeous. I spear some of my prawn salad and offer her some, but she just looks at me and won't let me take the conversation off on the tangent I wanted to go. The thing about Dermot is, he sleeps with everyone he knows except me. It's like his mark of respect or something. Is he gay? Not exactly. She smiles again, briefly flashing those nicotine teeth. I should photograph those teeth. I thought so, she says, dropping her voice. At your party, you know, we both went to the back kitchen to fetch your cake. Oh, it was nothing really, a silly thing. The candles wouldn't light and he made some stupid joke, but I thought he was flirting with me. I'm reminded that, though I don't see her too often, and though we're often mistaken for sisters, these are not the reasons I sometimes forget that she's my mother. We get the tram to Cambridge, to her new place. She moved out of Leta's boyfriend's apartment last month, and she's a little sketchy on the details. I quite liked Leta's boyfriend, what I heard of him anyway. She seemed less jokey and apologetic about him than the others. She was breathless and fretful, and it astonished me that someone could make her act that way. We walk down a broken pavement that's littered with blue and red frat party cups. I kick them out of the way. The wheels of my suitcase get stuck in the cracks in the path. She doesn't help me haul it out. Here we are, she says, fumbling with keys. I have to warn you, it isn't much. I guess I could have anticipated that Boston apartments don't come furnished. We have a glass of the better stuff, which I secretly enjoy less than the cafe bottle, and lean against the counter, chatting intermittently. Eventually, I cried jet lag and retired to my room. The windows don't have curtains yet, so I know I'll be woken in a gust of sunlight at 7 a.m. Best way to adjust the body clock, I suppose. I climb onto the inflatable mattress in the corner and curl up. I wake at 3:30. There's clearly no talking to my body clock. My throat feels shriveled. I need water. The mattress hisses and writhes as I stumble to my feet. In the kitchen, I put a glass under the tap. Oh, you're here, comes Orla's voice dully. I jump slightly, turn and see her outline, a lotus position in the corner of the dark living room. Her face is lit eerily by the glow of the computer on her lap. Hi, I say. Just wanted a drink. Sure. I know I have to ask why she's awake and on her computer at 3:30. I go and stand beside her, but I feel huge and imposing, so I get down on my knees. Everything okay? I ask. Her eyes are huge and very black. Just got an email, she says, fingers flexing on the keyboard. From Mark. He's back with his ex. I'm sorry. I know I was told Mark's name, but it's as if I'm hearing it for the first time. Yeah, he's rather to the point. She sighs. I had high hopes, you know. I'm not getting any younger, and it felt like a chance to settle down, start over. There it is then. She wants another go at family life. I don't say anything. Do you have a guy you love, Jules? No. You ever been in love? There's so much I don't know about you. We should talk about these things, really. I have a sudden rush of panic. She forces out a giggle. Hello, Earth to Jules? Ever been in love? Sadly, no, I sigh dramatically, going along with the jollity. Of course not. You're too smart. I bristle slightly. I've been called smart before, though not always in a complimentary way. I do have feelings, you know, I say, and I'm surprised at how petulant it sounds, the only full sentence I've spoken. Her face crumples in the greenish laptop light. I'm sorry, she says. I didn't mean. No, it's okay, I say, embarrassed for us both. I want to change the subject before I end up apologizing too. I'm sorry. I don't always know how to talk to you, honey, she says, her voice smothered in unshed tears. It's hard. We're not around each other much. She laughs a tiny laugh. You even call me by my first name, for God's sake. Yeah, that's... You don't have to explain. We sit there a while, my leg going to sleep under the weight of me. No sound except the low, gossipy noise of late-night traffic on the street below. She says, I remember the last time you called me ma'am, actually. You were 9. I was visiting you and your father for a few weeks. And Kitty Kiernan, you remember her? Of course I do. Yeah, well, we were sitting outside on that bench that used to be at the gable end. Really hot day for once, we needed the shade. And Kitty Kiernan got hold of a mouse just a few meters away from us. She was playing with it, letting it go, and the mouse's little legs going, trying to carry itself away. And then Kitty Kiernan would just pounce on it again. Do you remember? I don't, but I say, I think so. Anyway, you started crying, burying your face against me. You said, Ma'am, how can Kitty Kiernan be so cruel? I was at a bit of a loss. I just babbled away. Eventually I said, oh honey, it's just nature, you know, like in the Serengeti. And of course that got your attention, because you were all into David Attenborough at the time. Like I said, smart. She paused. You stopped crying then, and you got brave enough to watch the whole thing, wide-eyed. And Kitty Kiernan finally finished the mouse off, and your little body just gave this heave of relief. We're quiet for a while. I'm sorry, I say, because it's all I can think of to say. She shakes her head. For what? I know that maybe I should have called her ma'am just now. It would have been a meaningful moment. But a part of me cringes and balks at those moments that most people, maybe rightly, regard as being the stuff of a good life. Still, I look at her face, honest now, not trying to project anything, and I feel ashamed, remembering my resolve to cruise through this visit on autopilot. I should maybe hug her, but it's too awkward in this dark, unfurnished room. I'd be groping into a corner, losing my balance, hitting edges. Do you want a cigarette? I ask, trying to find something we can share. I remember I left my handbag on the kitchen counter. I jump up and pull out a cigarette and light up, wishing I hadn't, knowing my shaking hands are making the lighter's flame hover in the air like an uncertain bug. No thanks, honey, she says. I've quit. I laugh nervously. Congratulations. I take a drag from mine, letting the smoke dribble from my mouth, then impulsively go to the sink and stab it out. Go back to bed, Jules. You need your rest. Okay, see you in the morning? "See you," she says, sounding strangely loud, as if she's closer than she is. I climb back into my bed, bury my face in the pillow. I want to drop off, but I'm filled with longing that I can't name, and I can't get comfortable. I try a few positions, on my belly, even the fetal position, but my body just aches. I finally flip onto my back and try to keep my spine stiff and straight. I stare at the ceiling until the light spills in. Sunrise. Thanks.
Next up is Danielle McLaughlin, who's going to read from Night of the Silver Fox, which is originally published in 2012. And earlier in 2012, we published the first story from Danielle. Fair to say, not the first story that she'd submitted to us, but I had got back and said, please submit something else. And she did. And then she came back to me and she said that she'd really like to submit a longer story, but she was worried about the word count being too much for us. And she said it was, over 5,000 words, and most magazines don't take longer stories, so she was nervous around it. And I was going, if this is the story you want me to read, well then I definitely want to read it. And that was Night of the Silver Fox. And when I read Night of the Silver Fox, I knew that there would be a collection from Danielle if we got stories of that calibre, which we did over the next couple of years, and we published Danielle's first collection in 2015, Dinosaurs On Other Planets. So the story she's reading now is from that collection and was originally published, as I said, in 2012, and we're very happy to have it in the anthology now. So, and Danielle is a writer from Cork and has been writing for about the last 6 or 7 years. No, it's probably longer now, 7 or 8. And is currently working away on a novel, and we're also working together on an anthology of writing that is by people who are also involved in the law. And so Danielle had this idea because she's a solicitor herself, and so she's been putting that together for the last while. And we're hoping to publish that before Christmas, and it's going to be in aid of the Peter McVerry Trust. So we're trying to get the word out about that. And we're trying to also get the book out. But yeah, that's not today's job. So can we have a welcome for Danielle McLaughlin?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be reading here this afternoon. I'm going to read from a story called Night of the Silver Fox. This story had its beginnings when one day, driving north with my husband and kids, we overtook a lorry on the road. 2 guys in the cab of the lorry, and the smell from the lorry was one of the worst smells I've ever experienced. I had no idea what it was, and I turned to my husband and I said, "What was that smell?" And my husband is from a fishing community up in the Inishowen Peninsula, and he said, "Oh, maybe it's a load of fish meal going to a mink farm." And I thought, fish meal, mink farm, what sort of a strange world is this? And what sort of an evening lies ahead for these 2 guys in the lorry on their way to a mink farm? So that was where the story came from. Like Declan said, it's a long, short story. All my stories up to this were quite short, because I was keeping them to maybe 2,000 or 3,000 words, because that was the submission length for magazines and competitions. And this one, I think it's the first of my stories where I started getting into using my own voice, because that only happened for me when I let the stories be as long as they needed to be. So I'm very grateful to the Stinging Fly for including the story in the anthology. Because it's so long, you'll be glad to hear that I'm not going to read the whole lot of it, but I will read the first 3 or 4 pages from the beginning. Night of the Silver Fox. They stopped for diesel at a filling station outside Abbeyfield. It was late evening, dusk closing like a fist around 2 pumps set in a patch of rough concrete, and a row of leafless poplars that bordered the forecourt. Kavanagh swung down out of the cab and slapped the flank of the lorry as if it were an animal. He was a red-faced, stocky man in his late 30s. As a child, he had been nicknamed Curly because of his corkscrew hair, and the name had stuck, even though he was now almost entirely bald, just a patch of soft fuzz above each ear. There was a shop with faded HB posters in the window, and boxes of cornflakes on display alongside tubs of Swarfiga and rat pellets. "Fill her up," Kavanagh said to the teenager who appeared in the doorway. Then he spat on the ground and walked around the back of the building to the toilet. George stayed in the cab and watched the boy, who was about his own age, pump the diesel. The boy was standing well back from the lorry, one hand holding the nozzle, the other clamped over his nose and mouth. When his eyes met Jared's in the wing mirror, Jared looked away. 3 months in, and he was still not used to the smell. The fish heads with their dull, glassy eyes. The skin and scales that stuck to his fingers. The red and purple guttings that slipped from the fish's bellies. The smell of dead fish rose ghost-like from the meal that poured into the factory silos. Jared shaved his hair tight, cut his nails so short his fingers bled. At night in the pubs in Castletown Bare, he imagined fine shards of fish bone lodged like shrapnel beneath his skin, and tiny particles of scales hanging in the air like dust motes. The smell didn't bother Kavanagh, but then Kavanagh had been reared to it. "Daylight robbery," Kavanagh said when he returned to the lorry. He handed the pump attendant the money. "Bring me out 2 packets of Tato and have a packet for yourself." He shook his head as he climbed back into the cab. "Daylight robbery," he said again. 4 cents a litre dearer than Slattery's. Jared didn't ask why they hadn't gone to Slattery's. Slattery's had stopped their tab a few weeks back, and Kavanagh had been keeping his distance since. Kavanagh hummed tunelessly while he waited for the boy to return with the crisps and his change. It was a fragment of a ballad he had taken up sometime after they passed Groan, 40 miles earlier, and he had not let it go since. Taped to the walls of the cab were pictures torn from magazines of women in an assortment of poses. They were mostly Asian and in varying states of undress. Kavanagh had a thing for Asian women. A photograph of Kavanagh's wife, Nora, taken at last year's GAA dinner dance, was stuck between a topless girl on a Harley Davidson and 2 dark-eyed women in crotchless panties. Nora had blonde, wispy hair and glasses, and the straps of her dress dug furrows into her plump shoulders. "We're in Injun territory now," Kavanagh said, when he saw the boy coming across the forecourt. "These Limerick bastards would rob the teeth out of your head," and he counted the change down to the last cent before putting it in his pocket. It was almost dark when they pulled back onto the road. Kavanagh threw a packet of crisps across the cab. "That'll keep you going," he said. "We can't count on Liddy for grub." 4 miles before Kilcrohan, they turned down a narrow side road, grass growing up the centre. Briars tore at the side of the lorry. "There's a man in Dundalk runs one of these on vegetable oil," Kavanagh said. "Did you ever hear anything about that?" "No," said Gerard, although he remembered reading something in a newspaper a couple of months back. If he let on that he knew anything at all, Kavanagh would have him tormented. Kavanagh had a child's wonder for the new and the strange. Each new fact was seized upon and dismantled, taken apart like an engine and studied in its various components. He had been bright at school, but had left at 14 to work in the fish factory. Kavanagh shook his head. "I don't think I could stand it," he said. "The smell. It must be like driving around in a fucking chipper." Gerard glanced across at Kavanagh and tried to work out if he was serious. Kavanagh was watching the road, fingers drumming the steering wheel, humming to himself again. The light from the dashboard lent a vaguely sainted glow to his features. Gerard decided not to say anything. Kavanagh broke off his humming and sighed. "You're all chat this evening," he said. "I can't get a word in edgeways. Are you in love or what?" "Fuck off," Gerard said. But he was smiling as he turned to look out at the trees that reached black and tall from the hedges, their branches slapping against the lorry's window. Gerard had first been to Liddy's mink farm back in August, 6 weeks after he started working for Kavanagh. He had not been able to shake the memory of the place since. It was partly the farm itself, and it was partly Liddy's daughter. She was about 17, with blue-black hair, eyes heavily ringed with black liner. When Kavanagh had gone inside with her father, she had taken Gerard across the yard to show him the mink. The mink were housed in sheds a couple of 100 feet long, 20 or 30 feet wide, with low sloping roofs of galvanized sheeting. The sides were open to the elements, wind blowing in from the mountains to the west. Gerard followed the girl into the first shed and along a sawdust path down the centre. In wire mesh cages on either side were thousands of mink, mostly all white, with here and there a brown one. They darted back and forth and stood on their hind legs, heads weaving, snouts pressed against the wire. Their eyes glittered like wet beads, and they twisted and looped, hurling their bodies against the sides of the cages. Gerard stood in front of a cage and poked a finger through the mesh. A mink stopped chewing its fur and looked at him, a vicious tilt to its chin. It sniffed the air, crept closer and snapped, grazing the tip of his finger. Then it backed away to stare at him from a distance. The girl was a couple of paces ahead, watching. "I suppose you think it's cruel," she said. Her hair was tucked into the hood of her jacket, and she had her arms folded across her chest. Gerard examined his finger and shrugged. "It's none of my business," he said. The girl had stared at him for a moment, saying nothing, her dark eyes narrowing. Then she sighed. It's what they're bred for, she said, turning away. They don't know any different. I think I'll leave that there. Thank you very much for listening.
Our next final reader is Danny Denton. And I think we've published, so he's going to read it from a story from 2010 called Cana Wedding. So another writers with potentially squeamish reaction to the news. In fact, I know that he was. But we're going to do it to you, Danny. So this was the third story that we published by Danny. I think the first one might have been in 2007. So this was a young writer coming through, definitely, and the stories were all doing something different, and Danny was also working on a novel, and I'm very happy to say that earlier this year in Cork, I was here in February for the launch of his first novel, The Early King and the Kid in Yellow, published by Granta. And so Danny has maintained his kind of involvement with the magazine in terms of submitting work to us, and just as of pretty much this month, or last month, he agreed to become one of our contributing editors, which means that he is sharing the burden of reading, the burden of reading submissions as they roll in for each issue of the magazine. So we're delighted to have Danny join that team, and delighted to have him here today to read for you. So, Danny Denton.
Grateful to Declan for everything the Sting and Fly has done for me. I'm really grateful to be included in this. I'm really grateful to you for coming. I'll read the story. It's about a wedding that happens during a storm, and actually it only kind of happens around the corner from here in the South Map. If anyone knows the South Map, I'm going to read 2 bits from it. Because I'm very proud of all of it, but I'm just going to read 2 bits from it. On television screens, in the houses that still have power, families and housemates and people alone watch footage of the destruction. Predicted to be the most powerful storm since the nation's records began, it is the tale of a Category 3 hurricane that has decimated parts of Mexico and the Revillagigedo Islands. Here, trees come down along primary roads and wild borines. There is already a death toll, the first note of its staccato passage struck in South Leitrim, an elderly man favouring the promise of a pub and the local news over the danger of the gales. Further south, 2 people are married in the eyes of God. They say that the hotel would probably be closed, the church too, but because of the recession, they must take what business they can get. The cars should never have ventured beyond the driveway, they say, but still they move in slow train along the abandoned dual carriageway, from Country Chapel to 4-star city centre hotel. From back seats, the wedding party cheerfully ask the drivers to sound the horns, even as they glance nervously out the window, watching for a swaying tree or a cow lifted on high like in the film. But the driver's klaxon call is lost in the howling as they descend into the vacant city sprawl, each car rocking from side to side. Chip bags, cans, plastic bottles, newspapers, polystyrene cups, wrappers, pens, cardboard, fruit skin, cartons of various design. All kinds of debris is chased up the Mall as the cars park outside the hotel. An empty shopping trolley shudders across the road to clatter into the curb and fall, sliding then in the direction of the river. "Fuck this," says John to his suited friends, and he is the first to force his way from a car. John knows most here, old classmates, but he was probably invited to this small wedding only because he attended both stag parties. The first in Prague and the second for those who couldn't travel in Wexford. As he opens the door, the gale rips at its hinges and his suit jacket flutters, suddenly panicking, wanting to be anywhere but on his shoulders. Slamming the door, he makes for the troop of staff who have gathered inside the glass-fronted lobby and look out at him, dazed. As two porters let him in, the current bursts through the lobby like a tantrum, scattering flyers and brochures from the marble reception counter. A vase topples from its plinth to be caught by a young, surprised receptionist. Fair play to you. John digs his hands into his pockets, pinching his thighs, embarrassed now that he is the first. He should have at least escorted somebody. Anything would have been better than the selfish dash for refuge. He stands among the uniforms, looks out with them to the wedding cars, and remarks at what a crazy thing they have all done. We should all be at home. None of us will ever forget this day, the manager says, an edge of excitement in his voice. He'll tell this one forever. Outside, some tiles come off a roof, and we feel that the world, for all its sins, is truly coming to an end. When the first car moves off, John is stricken with fear, again pinches his thighs. They're calling the whole thing off, going home without him. He leers giddily at the two porters. They're leaving? The porters smile. Ribbons cling to the bonnet of the Rolls Royce, are a frantic blur as it turns a wide circle, coming up onto the pavement and lining up about 2 feet from the doors. Making up for his earlier lapse in etiquette, John pushes his way out and opens the back door, puts a hand out for Josephine Kelleher, née Kelly, who wears a simple ivory dress. A woman of 27, with curtains of dark hair, Josephine was the first dance John ever had, a slow set at a rowing club disco, aged 11 maybe. She steps out now and smiles at him as if he is a total stranger, says, thanks, and places a hand on her head to keep the hair right, says, dear God. Of course, it should have been Cian Kelleher chaperoning her like this, would have been, had John not stepped out with his stupid smile and fraudulent bravado. Cian was a year ahead of John throughout school, and had always that enviable, quiet confidence. He never needed anyone's attention, never had to talk himself up. John cannot look at him in the face now as he follows after his wife and the Rolls Royce moves on. The second car follows suit. Relieved parents finally arrive in the company of the priest and a sole surviving grandparent. They remark yet again on the weather and the fact that they are almost the only ones here over 40 years of age. They are grateful for these two seeds of conversation. Next come bridesmaids and groomsmen and the people with whom John shared the fourth car. JJ strides up and asks, "Can we get pissed now?" Soon the lobby becomes a quiet place again, and in a small function room in the belly of the building, away from the howling winds, the bar is set upon by 20-something-year-olds. By Christ, John says to JJ at some point, what kind of omen is it for the holy union of our own two friends? And they proceed to drink a lot of wine and beer and shorter measures. And things get a little bit wild at the wedding. And during this time, John has made friends with another guest of the wedding called Orla. In the wedding hall, people pose for photographs, postures ludicrous and sincere. John emerges from the bathroom and realizes the beauty of the room. Fairy lights adorn the long curtains and ivory drapes billow about a huge chandelier. Spotlights strobe the dance floor, making holograms of the dancers. Everything reels for a moment, and then Orla is there again. I was wondering where you went. She takes him by the arms. JJ winks. With the dinner over, there are bottles of red wine still on the tables. Tables that are lonely Shinto gods now, the chairs all pulled away from them. Orla arrives with a tray of blue shots, and the group winces when they empty them. Someone else returns with more. Where does all the drink come from? The shirts and tongues hang out. The eyes have lost all focus. Paddy's tie is on his head. We are the generation that remembers life before the mobile phone, before the internet. Where did all the drink come from? John dances with Orla, a glass of red wine in his hand, the liquid swirling in the glass. Funny how it moves like that. Some of it lifts out of the glass, defying gravity, spilling onto her dress. It's magical how it happens, but then she's looking at the wine stain on her chest and rubbing at it. He apologizes, mumbling, and she laughs as she tilts a dollop of her own red wine onto his shirt. Now we're even. Even. He throws wine onto her legs, where it runs over her knees. She shrieks. People look serious, then they laugh. She empties her glass over his head. Lads around them are dancing with each other like lovers, hugging and cheek kissing and mock humping. Orla puts her hands to her mouth, shocked and amused at what she has done. JJ is hysterical about it all, so John throws what's left of his glass into JJ's face. The dumbfounded look comes into the butcher, the widening of the eyes, the O-shaped mouth. Orla's bent over, crying tears of joy, when JJ empties the contents of his own glass into her hair. Then she's shrieking again, and someone else gets involved on her behalf, throwing a clear liquid onto JJ's shirt. It's as if John has only blinked, and suddenly everybody on the dance floor is pouring alcohol over everybody else. Bottles of the Shiraz have been retrieved from tables and are poured liberally over heads. The floor is a shallow, bloody pool. JJ gets Paddy in a headlock and decants a half bottle through his hair. Orla slips screaming on her arse. Some people still dance to the music, throwing their arms around and embracing the drink dispensed over them as rain after a drought. The elders look on with awful faces. Paddy dives chest first across the wet surface. John is tittering, and still pouring whatever drink he can find over friends and strangers, sloshing some of it into his mouth, the rest over shoulders and backs. 3 porters are trying to break it up, but they're getting doused themselves. John sees Boris asleep at a table, head buried in folded arms. A full bottle is emptied out of John's happy hands. The lights come on, and the music stops. People drenched in wine run about like children in a gory water fight. There is a brief fight, soon broken up. The bar has been shut down, and John and JJ trawl the tables for leftover drink. Someone says the guards have been called. Some men are pulling off heavy red shirts. One cousin is down to a pair of underpants, standing by the top table with his hands on his hips, looking crossly about him. The 2 newlyweds are nowhere to be seen. People begin to disappear into bathrooms and bedrooms. We'd be thrown out but for the storm, someone says. The army's out for us. For Christ's sake, we're not at war. The manager is telling people to go to their rooms. Anyone not staying is to assemble in the lobby. We'll have to pay for this damage. Battle fucking royale. How did this happen? It's only a bit of crack, for Christ's sake. The thing is that it's the random mutation of non-random cells. Let's nobody lose their cool now. Who started it? Fuck's sake, who started it? That's how you do it now. There's no fucking taxis. Of course there's no taxis. There's no anything out there. John understands none of this. He rocks there, dead-eyed. Thinks about the panini machine on the corridor at the office. Then there's the wine drying on the faces and the arms filling the shoes. He's suddenly hungry. Has anyone any food? He asks. Has anyone any grub? In the lobby, the manager stares, his arms folded. Then John wanders corridors alone, in a dream within a dream, passing numbered bedroom doors, down an echoing staircase with a yellow block wall. The little glass windows of service doors, all locked, showing kitchens and stores where he could eat if he could only gain access. A fire escape. He pushes the bar and goes out. Fuck them all. The howling winds barrel down the dark side street. All becomes clear where it was muddled and dimmed before. The door won't open again to let him back in. and he is bullied along by the wind. He lets out his tongue and turns his head sideways to catch the currents. In moments his clothes are dry. He could eat a horse. He could eat the chunks of slate and masonry that litter the streets. The fast clouds above him too. Tide flying in his face, he takes out his phone to call someone, but fumbles and drops it. Watches as the pieces are sucked away down the pavement. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.